Good afternoon, everyone. Just have a minute to let everybody in. Uh, just to be prepared. It seems like Teams and maybe Microsoft is having a little bit of a glitchy time right now. Wayne and I were both having issues, so if something happens and it cuts out, that's likely what it is. So fingers crossed that everything goes smoothly for the next hour of your time with us. Um, Today's Lunch and Learn is all about setting your staff up for success, really the first 30 days of onboarding and training and mentoring. Um, but before we get started, I just want to thank Wayne and ChildFriendly for his time today, for sponsoring these Lunch and Learn series, and really for the continued support of these professional development opportunities for our childcare sector. We all know the changes in Alberta for our PD funding have really left some of us with very little options for what kind of resources and supports are out there. So very grateful to ChildFriendly to make sure that these keep going for you guys. Today's session, like I said, is all about setting up your new staff for success during their first 30 days. While orientation is absolutely part of that process, effective onboarding is really about helping your new educators build confidence, develop competence, and really become valued members of your team through intentional coaching, mentorship, and leadership. We have a new format for our Lunch and Learns. So I'd love your feedback if you want to share it with me after, if you've been to the previous ones. But every one of our Lunch and Learn series really follows kind of a three-part structure: learn, apply, and lead. In the learn section of the sessions, we're really going to build on knowledge and awareness that operators need to understand for what really is happening during that first month of employment today, or whatever the topic might be for our next sessions. What do capable people sometimes, why do capable people sometimes struggle? What are your new educators experiencing that they may not say out loud? What does competency actually look like in practice? And in the apply section, we'll move from that understanding into implementation. So we're going to look at what the structure of the first 30 days of training is, how you can train through practice, how to select and prepare mentors, or coaches, and how to really coach staff intentionally during those real moments in the classroom. Then we'll move into the lead section, which will focus on your role as an operator, as a leader in your program. How do you know when someone is ready for more responsibility? How do you separate a training gap from a performance outcome? And how do you hold a meaningful 30-day conversation with those new staff? My goal today is that you leave with something practical that you can take away and use tomorrow. Not a whole bunch of things that might feel overwhelming, but hopefully some real practical tools that you can take away from the session. We're going to move through those three learning invitations. First, we'll learn about why the first 30 days really matter. Then we're going to apply those practical strategies that support growth in your daily practice. And then we'll finish up by the lead section and creating the systems, the accountability, and the follow through that's needed to develop strong educators in your programs. As you listen today, I want you to think about your most recent new hire. Think about their first morning or first day with you, who greeted them, who showed them around, who explained the routines in the center, what were they expected to know by the end of that first day, what were they expected to do independently by the end of the first week, and how was their progress really observed? How consistent would you say that experience has been? If they had started in one room versus another or on a different shift. And, I think they'll just kind of have those in your head today as we're going through. More than happy to take questions from you as we're going. Feel free to pop your hand up or turn your microphone on. If there's certain things that you want to talk about in your program, more than happy to do that today. So we're going to begin with the understanding part about the first 30 days. First 30 days in a program is not simply that administrative period. It's really a period of observation, learning, testing, and decision making for both the employer and the new employee. You are deciding really whether this person has a potential to meet the expectations of the role. At the same time, they're deciding whether this is the right workplace for them and if they can succeed in your center. We sometimes think of retention as something that we address later on, long term, but really that focus on recognition, staff appreciation, wages, professional development, or opportunities for advancement, those things matter, but retention begins way earlier than most of us think. It begins with the experience an employee has from the very first day when they walk into your program to start. I want you to think about the last educator you hired, like we started in the beginning. When they walked through the doors on day one, what did you think their job was? Most operators would probably say to learn the policies, meet the team, understand the routines, get comfortable in the classroom, and all of that is true. But during those first few weeks, the educator is also quietly evaluating four things, which you see up on the slide today. They're evaluating their role, their leader, their team, and their future with your program. First, they're trying to understand their role. What exactly am I responsible for? What can I decide on my own? When do I need approval and who do I go to for approval? What does success look like in this program? Even an educator with 10 years, 20 years of experience does not automatically know what your expectations, what program expectations are. They may understand child development, they may know how to plan activities, they may have worked in several daycare programs, but they do not yet know how your center handles family communication, incident reporting, transitions, supervision, behavior guidance, documentation, all those things. Second, they're watching their leader. Can they ask a question here? Will they be embarrassed if they make a mistake? Will someone notice if they're struggling? Will they offer support? Does leadership spend time in the classroom, or do they appear only when something has gone wrong? Third, they're going to be learning about the team. Do people help one another? What is the culture of the center? Is it supportive? Is there gossip happening? Is information shared clearly? Are concerns addressed directly or through gossip or other means? When someone makes a mistake, does the team help them or correct it, or do they talk about it afterwards? And finally, on the fourth, the educator is thinking about their future. Can they see themselves growing in this program? Do they feel valued? Is this a workplace where they can see themselves staying long term? Operators sometimes believe an employee makes the decision to leave months later. In reality, many employees begin making that decision during their first few weeks with the program. Retention does not begin with staff appreciation days or weeks. It absolutely starts on that first day, first week in your centers. One of the most common mistakes in onboarding is measuring completion rather than readiness. The forms might be signed, policies have been reviewed, checklists are done, staff files are complete. Maybe the employee has shadowed another educator, and we sometimes will say, okay, orientation is finished. But completing paperwork only tells us that information was provided. It doesn't tell us that the employee has actually understood it, or that they can apply it. And it does not tell us, how they will respond when the classroom becomes busy or stressful on those hard days. I'll give you a common scenario here. We have a new educator who has completed every item on an orientation checklist. That the criminal records submitted, first aid certificate, everything is checked. They've signed all the agreements and waivers, read the supervision policies and handbook. On paper, everything looks complete. But when the leadership comes to observe her in the classroom, she's spending long periods focusing on one child with her back turned to the rest of the room. She's kind, she's engaged, she's, clearly cares about the children, but active supervision has not yet been demonstrated. And that's obviously a problem, but it's a huge difference between completing orientation and developing competency in the classroom. The goal for that first 30-day period is really to build on three things: information and knowledge. The educator needs to understand the policies, routines, and expectations. They need to know where to find information, where to go for support. The second is competency. Can they actually apply the information in a real situation, in a stressful moment, in a, during a hard day, or when things have escalated? Can they supervise a group while responding to an individual child? Can they follow procedures even when they're feeling rushed? Can they regulate themselves when there's several demands kind of happening at once? And the third is that confidence and connection. Can they ask questions without fear or embarrassment? Do they feel included in the team? Are they part of the culture at the center? Are they beginning to work independently while still recognizing when they need support? And the operator tip on this slide, I think, is really important to highlight. Measuring onboarding by competency, not by paperwork. Can the employee actually explain the expectation if they were asked? Can they demonstrate the skills? And do they know when and who to go to for help? Those questions will tell you far more than any kind of completed onboarding checklist or process steps. When new staff often appear calm, even when they're feeling overwhelmed, people can appear calm. And I think it's really important to kind of change your, perspective as a leader to try and see what they may be experiencing during that first 30 days of training with you. Maybe they're smiling and they're nodding. They may tell you everything is going great and going really well. But internally, maybe they're thinking, am I doing this correctly? Am I asking too many questions? Does everyone else understand this except for me? What will happen if I make a mistake? And I think one of the most dangerous assumptions that we can make as leaders is that silence really means that there's an understanding there. Sometimes that silence means an employee is afraid to admit that they're confused. I'll give you another common example. With this one, we have a new educator who's learning the closing routine at the daycare. On Monday, one staff member tells her that the outdoor safety checklist should be completed before the children come inside. On Tuesday, a different educator says it's completed after the children leave. On Wednesday, someone tells her, we don't usually write it down unless there's a problem. The new employee does not want to appear difficult, so she doesn't challenge anyone, doesn't ask any questions. She simply just follows the person she's working with on that specific day. Now, the program has had an inconsistency and potentially a compliance concern here with this scenario. But from the new educator's perspective, she's following the instructions she's been given on each of those days. And this is really why, as an operator, as a leader in a program, it's important to have check-ins that are very specific with your new educators. Asking questions like, how is everything going? Will usually get you one answer. Everything's great, it's good, it's fine. But asking really specific questions here, like, what still feels unclear to you? Which routine do you feel least confident leading? Have you received different instructions from different people? When have you needed help, but you were not really sure who to ask? Those specific questions will really result in specific and meaningful conversations. You'll be able to gauge where they're at and what kind of gaps may be occurring, like we saw with that scenario. They'll help you to identify whether the concern is with the employee or if it's with the consistency of your system, your mentors, or the training that you have going on for that staff member. We use words like competency. I think it's one of our buzzwords right now in childcare. We use it quite often, but we don't always really define what it is very clearly. An operator may say she's doing great, but really, what is that based on? Is the educator friendly, has a great attitude, the children seem to like her, families are happy with her, all valuable qualities, but they may not automatically demonstrate competency in that role. Competency is observable. It's a competent educator maintains active supervision. They follow policies and licensing requirements. They're communicating professionally with staff and team members as well as with parents. They can make sound decisions even in stressful moments. They can regulate themselves under pressure. They can complete responsibilities consistently. They recognize when a situation is beyond their experience and they'll ask for support. And if we can use supervision here as an example, asking, does an employee understand supervision, is way too broad. Instead, if you're observing specific behaviors to get to that conclusion to see if they understand supervision, you could be looking at where do they position themselves? Can they see the full group? Are they scanning the environment? Can they have meaningful interactions with one child without losing the awareness of the rest of the group? Do they anticipate risk? Do they count children during transitions? Do they communicate before they're leaving a room? If you imagine an educator sitting on a floor helping a child complete a puzzle, that interaction looks warm and positive, but behind her you could have two children who are climbing on furniture and another child who's moving towards an open doorway. If we only look at the educator and child interaction in that moment, the educator appears engaged, but if we look at the full responsibility and the full competency required for active supervision, there's a serious gap. Competency has to be defined in observable behaviors. Tomorrow, when you go into your program, choose one responsibility in your program. It could be active supervision like this, it could be diapering, maybe medication, documentation, behavior guidance. Maybe there's something that has been a bit of an issue in the program. Write down exactly what a competent practice would look like for that, that one kind of responsibility. Not something general like understand supervision, but write down what you actually need to be able to see and observe to show competency in that area. That'll give your leaders, it'll give yourself some perspective, and the mentors you have training new staff, it will give them a consistent standard to teach and observe from. So if you're looking to kind of revamp some of your onboarding and training processes, this is a really great place to start. Super easy to do, and you can kind of break it down by very specific tasks like we listed out here. And I think, you know, it's always important to recognize that even the best educators can absolutely still struggle. Sometimes we hire the wrong person. It happens. Sometimes we hire a good person, but we give them really inconsistent system to be trained in. New educators may be struggling because expectations were not clear or explained. Different employees had maybe given them conflicting direction. Too much information was provided at once, and understanding was really never checked. Feedback is only maybe happening after a problem, after a situation happens, or independence for that staff was expected too soon. Another common kind of childcare scenario around this, you could have a new educator who starts maybe on Monday. On her first day, she observes the group, observes the classroom, but on Tuesday, the center is short-staffed. Maybe somebody called in sick or something, and so you have her start to begin by covering breaks. On Wednesday, she's counted in ratio and expected to lead through transitions. By Friday, leadership or the operator, the supervisor is frustrated because she's not following the transition routine correctly, but you have to ask, was she actually trained? Was she simply present while other people completed the routine? That's a major difference. Being present versus being trained, completely different experience for that new educator. Another example around behavior guidance here. We have a new educator who may hear one staff member say, we redirect children and give them choices. Another staff member says, you need to be firm or they will walk all over you. And a third may use, you know, kind of timeouts or redirections that are not aligned with the program philosophy at all. And if the program has not clearly taught or modeled its expectations, that new educator will start to copy whatever person appears most confident, which could be a big problem in your center. So before assuming something is a performance concern, really pause and ask, you know, was the expectation really explained? Was the correct practice demonstrated for them? Did the employee practice with support from leadership? Was their practice observed? Did they actually receive any specific feedback? If the answer is no, then we have to go back to the training and start kind of almost over again. It's not a performance issue. That's a people issue, a people problem, or a training issue. We're going to move into the next kind of phase of the Lunch and Learn, which is our apply section. We're moving from the understanding the issue into like the practical implementation of it. So the central idea in this section is simple. Educators do not become competent just by receiving information alone. They become competent by seeing strong practice, trying it with support, receiving feedback, and repeating it until that practice really becomes consistent. The classroom is not only where employees perform their responsibilities, it's also where much of their training needs to happen. A strong first 30 days should have really clear progression. Week one is all about understanding. So the employee is welcome, they're introduced to the program, oriented with the key policies, showing some critical safety procedures and routines. Expectations are clarified. And by week one, it's also a time for leadership to observe them, asking, what experience does this person actually have? Where are they naturally confident? Where do they hesitate, and what do they need to relearn because maybe the program that they worked at previously did things differently than what you're expecting for your program. Do not assume that a resume will give you the complete answer on people. It's often very misleading. Week two is all about practice. So an educator moves from watching and observing into supported participation in the classrooms. They begin leading routines, completing documentation, communicating with families, and applying procedures with a mentor and supervision nearby. Feedback should happen every day, both positive and, kind of redirection, including, like that corrective feedback, but it also really should make sure you're recognizing what they're doing well. By week three, it should be about the application. Responsibility can increase. The educator can begin making more decisions, managing more complex situations, demonstrating whether expectations can be applied consistently. And then by week four, it's all about demonstration. So you could ask yourself, which competencies have been established? Are they doing great with the active supervision and transitions? How are they doing with maybe the day-to-day routines, communication, those kind of things? What still requires support? Where is the educator ready for greater independence? And what goals maybe should start to come next? What structured process, you don't have to have it very complicated. You could create a one-page plan with kind of 4 columns about, what do they need to understand? What do they need to practice and demonstrate? And really who's responsible for teaching and observing kind of each of those areas. Having something that's clear, even simple, like a one-page template, which we will share with you for the resources for this session, can really create far more consistency than just simply telling an employee to shadow the team. So on this slide, you're going to see a simple practical kind of training cycle. It starts with explain, demonstrate, practice, observe, give feedback, and then repeat. If you use a room transition here as an example, it's really good to kind of clearly see how this works. But first, you want to start by explaining what's expected. You might say something like, during transitions, one educator leads the children while the second educator checks the environment, checks the outdoor space, or whatever it is, confirms the count, and communicates before the group moves forward. That demonstrates the routine. Just do not simply complete it with the new educator standing beside you. You're narrating what you're doing. You're really making sure to reinforce exactly what the steps and expectations are. You could say things like, I'm standing here because I need to see both the children waiting and the children entering the hallway. I'm counting before we move, again, when we enter the hallway, and once more when we reach the playground. Then allow the educator to practice that same routine and those same steps with your support. Do not immediately leave them to just do it alone. Let them lead with the mentor, remaining close enough to guide and give that feedback. Then observe what happens in a real situation. Maybe one child will refuse to put their shoes on, another child suddenly needs to use the washroom, a parent arrives at the door, the group could lose focus, and that's where your competency of the educator will really become visible. And you can have an opportunity to give that specific feedback. So something along the lines of, you maintained your count throughout that transition. Next time, make sure you position yourself closer to the doorway so no child can move ahead of the group, and then repeat. So one successful transition does not always mean the educator can do it consistently, especially under different conditions. And the key message here really is that shadowing is not training unless someone is intentionally teaching, observing, and giving feedback. Standing beside an experienced educator creates exposure, but it does not automatically create learning or training or competency. Many programs say they have mentors. We hear this all of the time, and it's really a great thing you can incorporate if you're not doing this with training. But what we often see is that they have is a new educator who's been assigned to work next to maybe an experienced educator, and those are not always the same thing. A realistic example is you could have a new educator who's told, just watch what everyone else does. On Monday, she could watch one educator completing a diapering routine. Tuesday, she works with someone else who documents the routine totally differently. On Wednesday, she's moved to another room where the staff use different language and follow a totally different sequence. And by the end of the week, she has seen several versions of the same responsibility. She's not confused because she's failing to pay attention. She's confused because everyone is teaching personal preference instead of a consistent program standard. So a strong mentor really needs to model expected practice. They need to be able to explain why the routine matters, invite questions, observe objectively, and then reinforce what the program's expectations are and give feedback. They need to also be able to communicate clearly with leadership around how this is going with the staff, where they're competent, where the gaps may be. And one of the strongest lines, I think, as an operator, as you can remember, is every inconsistency in your program eventually becomes someone else's training. So if you have educators who are experienced and maybe really great at their job, but they're all doing something different, a new educator will learn with that inconsistency, not with kind of the clear expectations and practice that maybe you've set out in your program plan or for your program. So setting the mentor up for success. We need to be fair to those that we, I think, select as mentors in our program. A strong educator will not automatically just become a strong mentor or a strong trainer. Someone may be excellent with children, but really struggle to explain what they're doing. They may become impatient when a new educator needs repetition. They may avoid giving corrective feedback because they don't want conflict or they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Or they may teach shortcuts that leadership would not approve of, maybe personal preference for doing something rather than what the actual policies and standards are for the center. If you can imagine a very experienced educator mentoring someone who's brand new, the experienced educator could say something like, you don't need to write this down every time. We all know it was done. Well, the new educator assumes that this is the approved standard for the center because the information came from someone with seniority. That's why it's really important that you have preparation for your mentors as well. Before you're assigning that role to someone, you need to clarify exactly what the new educator needs to learn, what the mentor is responsible for teaching them, what procedures are non-negotiable, what concerns need to be reported to you as a leader, when you're going to check in with them as a leader, and they need permission to be able to raise concerns. They should be able to say, I have demonstrated this several times, but the educator is still struggling, or I'm not confident that this practice I'm going to be able to teach it the way the policy is written. You need a mentor who's not going to just be expected to kind of stand beside and walk the new employee through the program. You want them to be able to teach it, to model it, observe, and be able to communicate it. And you as the leaders still need to be able to lead within this process as well. So coaching in the moment, I think, is one of the most useful strategies you can take away from today. This simple kind of coaching approach that we've listed out for you on the slide, we have notice, name, and next step. And we can use active supervision to kind of guide through what this actually means. First, you could notice what happens. So you stayed near the group, but your back was turned while you were helping one child. It's specific, it's objective. You're not saying to them, you didn't do a good job or you were careless. You're describing what you saw, what you observed, what the behavior was. Next, you want to name why it matters. That creates a supervision gap because you cannot see or anticipate what the other children are doing. Now the educator understands that there's an impact here. Then you provide the next step. So next time, position yourself so you can support the child while you can still see the full group. And then follow up. So I will watch during the next transition so we can make sure that the new positioning is working. The final step is often missed. We often give feedback and then we assume the correction has happened. You need to follow up and make sure that you're confirming whether that employee understands and is applying it. It's one thing to just say it or have it written in a policy, but making sure that you're actually observing it and going through these kind of steps will ensure that the educator has a chance to fix things, that you're able to witness that it is actually working and they're moving forward in the right direction. Sorry. Leadership is our next section of the Lunch and Learn. And leadership really during that first 30 days requires judgment. You need to know when someone needs more teaching, more training, when they need correction, when they're ready to move forward with maybe some more responsibility and independence. When too much independence is given too early and maybe there's creating risk. Where maybe too little independence for too long will undermine their growth and their confidence in that role. So the goal is really about progressive responsibility based on demonstrated competency, which as a leader, you need to be able to lead, to be able to see that they're meeting those goals, that they are showing that demonstrated competency in the role. Before increasing responsibility, I have 4 kind of stages that we could look at moving through. First is, can they explain the expectation? Can the educator describe what active supervision is, what it requires? A lot of times we use these words, even in our regulations, and our educators don't really understand what they mean or what they look like in day-to-day practice and what is required to meet those regulations. Do they understand things like why ratios and positioning and scanning and communication matter? Second, demonstrate. So can they actually demonstrate that skill? Have they seen enough strong practice modeled in the program? Can they perform the task correctly? Do they follow the required procedures? And then apply. So can they apply it in real situations? This is where you will see if they can move beyond kind of ideal conditions. Can they maintain supervision while a child is upset? Can they follow procedures during a busy time in a classroom? Are they able to communicate professionally when a parent is frustrated? Can they make really sound, consistent decisions when they're under pressure or when stress, is present in the day for them? And fourth, are they ready to advance? Can responsibility be increased in a safe way? Will it increase risk? Do they understand the limits of their role? Can they identify where they need support and where to get it from? If you consider a new educator who's maybe leading an activity, they're doing a great job, it's going really well, but the room is really calm. That's a positive progress. But if somehow, something changes and they become overwhelmed when they have a child who's refusing to participate, maybe a child is crying or a third is leaving the group, and they don't know how to keep the activity going or keep themselves regulated during that moment and redirect, then maybe they're not ready to manage that routine without support. So competency really needs to hold up in real conditions. We all know our jobs are stressful. Days are not going to be easy all of the time. So having educators who can be competent and calm throughout stressful and up and down times is really important. Time in a role and experience, years of experience, are not always the same as readiness. An employee does not automatically just become competent because they passed 30 days of training in the program. So making sure that independence is based on demonstrated performance and not just a calendar or a timeline for your onboarding schedule. I think this one here is probably one of the most important distinctions an operator can make. A training gap means that the employee has not yet been properly taught, shown, or supported. Maybe the procedure was discussed but not really demonstrated, or the employee received different instructions from different people. Maybe they didn't have the opportunity to actually practice it. The leadership response here would be to explain, demonstrate, practice, observe, and reassess. A performance concern is different. The expectation was clear. The employee received training. They had the opportunity to practice. They demonstrated understanding, but they are still not following the expectation consistently. Now the leadership response becomes clarification, documentation, timelines, and accountability. We can use an example here of a personal phone in a classroom as an example. You have a new educator who's regularly checking her phone in the classroom. No one reviewed a phone policy. Several experienced staff are also using their phones, and leadership really has never addressed this. It's just kind of partly a training and a cultural issue. So the new employee is following what she's seeing. She's looking at what the other educators are doing and kind of mirroring that. But imagine the policy was reviewed on day one. The expectation was clear, it was explained, the educator was reminded in private, the concern was documented, and the phone use still continued, and no other educators are using phones at this time. It's no longer simply a training gap. It's a performance concern. This would be something where you're wanting to make sure that everything has gone well, you're documenting it, and then you can make decisions based on whether this is maybe the right fit, or you need to do some more training, or how you're going to move forward to really manage that performance concern. So training the gap, but managing the performance concern as you're moving forward and finishing kind of that 30-day training cycle. The 30-day conversation really should not feel like a surprise evaluation. It should be a summary of discussions that have already been happening. A review of what's going really well, identify where confidence has grown, be specific about which competencies have been demonstrated, clarify what still needs support, and discuss how the employee is receiving feedback. You could set goals for the next phase and really be honest about whether the role appears to be the right fit. Asking questions here that create reflection are really important, not kind of generic questions like, how do you think things are going, but specifics. And I've put a few on the screen for you here. Where do you feel most confident? What still feels unclear? What has helped you learn the most? Where have you received conflicting information? What supports would really help you to improve? And what feedback do you have for us? And I think, that final question about what feedback do you have for us is really an important question that matters. They may tell you things that you don't know. Maybe they'll say things like, I didn't know who I was supposed to ask for help, or I was told different things in different rooms, or I thought I was doing well because no one said anything. They didn't give me any feedback. That information will give you an opportunity to improve your systems. That 30-day conversation really is not only just about evaluating the employee, it's also about evaluating your onboarding and your training, your mentoring process, to really see how it's working for them, and what you can do in the future to make sure it's stronger. Strong onboarding really shouldn't depend on one supervisor's personality. It should not change completely between classrooms. It should not disappear during busy weeks, or if you have people who are calling in and you're short-staffed. It really needs to be strong. You have to have a strong plan for the first 30 days. Having operators who can assign clear responsibility, prepare mentors to be successful in that role, schedule those check-ins, like the 30-day conversation, be able to stand in and actually observe the practice that's happening, document the competency of the new educators, and be ready to address concerns as they're coming up early on, and continuing the development beyond that orientation period. I'll give you another example here before we move on. You could have two employees that start at the same center. One starts in a toddler room, for example. They have an experienced mentor who's explaining the routines and schedules, giving them daily feedback and checking in. The other one starts in a preschool room during a staff shortage. There's someone away maybe or something like that, and they're just told to follow the other educators. After 30 days, the first employee appears confident, they're consistent. The second appears disorganized, unsure. It would be really easy to say that maybe one is better than the other in the situation, but looking at this, you could easily recognize that one did not receive the same opportunity to succeed. That's where it's really important to have repeatable systems in place in your centers. You could go back tomorrow to your center, maybe look at a process again, like we did at the beginning, and ask yourself, what happens before day one? What must happen during week one? What should the employee practice during that week 2 period? And what should they be able to demonstrate here by day 30? Who's responsible at each stage of that system, of that process? And where are you going to document it? If those questions don't have clear answers for you, then the system you're relying on maybe is not set up for success. Maybe you're relying too heavily on informal communication or just kind of knowing what to do in that situation. So the goal should really never be to just complete an orientation. The goal is to develop educators who are safe, who are capable, confident, and ready to contribute to the success of your program. So making sure, your leadership is essential in your program. Good leadership also needs good, strong, consistent systems. And this is where I will hand you over to Wayne and ChildFriendly that can help operators really put into practice all of the things we discussed today in a consistent and manageable process, help you organize your onboarding and your documentation, making sure you're tracking everything for your training, you're doing your check-ins, and really developing that competency. So I'm going to pass it over to Wayne. Wayne, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just going to quickly and briefly discuss a couple ways our app can help support staff. On our platform, staff documentation can be easily stored and organized, as well as having the ability to monitor expiries for required certifications, ensure that professional development is completed, as well as performance reviews. Detailed attendance tracking and reports also allow you to see whether staff are overseeing the children effectively on our platform. There's approvals and permission levels that are available on the platform, which will allow directors to manage their teams effectively. We will also be looking to launch more staff-related features later this year, including easy ways for staff to effectively schedule their shifts. Yeah, and it'd be great if you're interested to learn more about our platform to reach out to me for a demo. And thanks so much, Crystal.
You're welcome. Thanks, Wayne. If you haven't had an opportunity to meet with Wayne and see what ChildFriendly can do, really encourage you to take a look and book a demo and see all of the new features that have been kind of rolled out in the last year. A lot has changed. So before we close, I just want to kind of wrap up and leave you maybe with 3 questions when you're looking at your training and your onboarding process, asking yourself, are you simply onboarding and orienting employees, or are you intentionally developing educators that are going to be successful in your program? How do you know when a new educator is competent? And would every new educator coming into your program receive the same quality of support and consistency of training? Making sure that, those first 30 days that you move someone from an uncertain place to a really competent, clear place. And I think too, as you leave here today, maybe choose one thing, one area in your center that you want to look at improving. Maybe look at creating a simple first week plan, identify and prepare kind of one mentor who could help with the training in your program. Maybe start to schedule those check-ins on specific dates and really define like one competency in observable terms. So maybe it's active supervision for you, maybe it's medication or documentation. Really, look at one thing that you can break down into what would be observable for you to be able to see if educators are really competent in that area. So one, small change can create such an improvement in your center. It'll create much stronger experiences for your new educators and a really, greater quality and consistency for your program. So thank you again for your time today. I know it's a busy week after a long weekend. Thank you to Wayne and ChildFriendly for making sure that these series continue to support our operators and educators. And we have our next one in September coming up already. So we'll see you back there. Next week, we have our learning lab for your educators. So check your inboxes if you're registered for that. But yeah, thank you for the work you guys are doing, for showing up, for trying to continue learning and improving your programs. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.